agenda is to give the introduction to Informatica, Informatica components, how we provide the lab for this training on Informatica. We will do one example, and also we'll discuss about the different components of Informatica, Client Tool Designer, and also some of the transformations. First and foremost, Informatica is a company. It's an organization, Informatica Corporation, in California, USA. This company was started in 1993, and they are the world leaders in the ETL space, that is extraction, transformation, and loading of data. They have captured 34% of the world market share. They are partners with SAP, PeopleSoft, Accenture, IBM, and many other companies, multinational companies. The current CEO of this Informatica talking about extracting the data from unstructured data. That will be the new era of ETL space, which we will discuss later. What is unstructured data? As Informatica is a company, it has different products which they sell across the globe. In the ETL space, their products are PowerMart, PowerCenter, PowerCenter RT. In metadata management space, they sell a product called SuperGlue. In the reporting space, they sell a product called Power Analyzer. The Power Analyzer tool is not much in the market. They couldn't make much market capital in the reporting space. Their power of Informatica is in the ETL space. The current version of Informatica is version 8, but we will be training you on version 7 of PowerCenter. In the later part of the training, we will be discussing about the difference between PowerMart, PowerCenter, and PowerCenter RT in the Chapter 3 of this training program. Coming to the architecture of Informatica PowerCenter 7.1 version, they have server component and client components. The server components, under the server component, they have two things called repository server and Informatica server. And whenever you install the server components of Informatica, you need a relational database. While installing the server components, they need a relational database where it will store its system tables, its own tables, which the people call it as a repository. So, as Informatica is an ETL tool, it does not have its own relational database product. So, it can store its system tables in any of the relational databases like Oracle, Sybase, Informix, DB2. But while installing the server components, it will ask for that database in which it has to install the system tables. So Informatica administrator will give that database on which it wants to create. They want to create that repository. So while installing the server, when you give the path or the database, its username, password, and if it is Oracle connect string. Then Informatica, while installing, will install its system tables. That is called as a repository. Then it has two different servers, repository server and Informatica server. And from the client perspective, it has designer, workflow manager, workflow monitor, and the repository manager. So under this repository, it will store its system tables, that is Informatica system tables. This is a database, and you have two servers called repository server and another server called as Informatica server. And then it will have different components from the client, which they call it as a repository manager. Another client component called as workflow manager. So, and another component called as workflow monitor. And another component called as designer in Informatica. So these four are the client tools of Informatica. The communication between these client tools is through the repository server, and repository server will communicate to the repository. Informatica server also communicates through the repository server. Before I go further down, let me tell you the rules in a Informatica projects. There are two roles in Informatica project. One is Informatica administrator. The other is Informatica developer or consultant. This program is for Informatica developer or consultant role, and Informatica administrator is the person who installs the Informatica. The server creates that repository, manages the servers, takes the backups, plus to access Informatica, he will create usernames, passwords, privileges, read-write privileges. So to create the usernames, passwords, privileges, the administrator will use to create these usernames, passwords, privileges, and also called as folders. We will discuss about folders also. Will be created by the administrator using these client tools called repository manager. All these four are called as client tools. These two are called as server components of Informatica, or the servers. Repository server and Informatica server. So this repository, using this repository server, the administrator will create the username, password, privileges, and folders. So using this tool, he creates the username, password, privileges. Through the repository server, it will be stored in the repository of the system tables. Then as a ETL developer or Informatica developer, we'll be using these 4 client tools. A developer of Informatica will use these 4 client tools: Designer, Workflow Manager, and Workflow Monitor. So whenever you log into Informatica as a developer, you need these 3 client tools. I'm really sorry. So Designer, Workflow Manager, and Workflow Monitor. Repository Manager is used for administration purpose. So as a ETL developer, you will be using Designer, Workflow Manager, and Workflow Monitor. Now what as a designer will do, any program you write it in this world, I'm talking from a traditional perspective or in a GUI based, first you will write the program. In Informatica you write it in a GUI based. You will write this program using the designer tool. And when you write this program in a GUI based in a designer tool, they call that program as mapping. This mapping which you will be developing using the designer tool, then it will go to the repository server, and through that repository server it will be stored in the repository. The program which you develop is called mapping. That will be developed by a developer. It will be stored in the repository through the repository server for that username and password. Now, when you save this mapping, like our traditional program, it will compile for syntax errors. Any syntax errors it will give you, but the mapping will be saved in the repository. Tomorrow if you want to reuse, you can open that mapping, it will come from the repository. Now after you create a mapping, the next thing what in a programming we do is second step is to execute that program. So in Informatica, we will execute that program by using the tool called Workflow Manager. Using the Workflow Manager tool, we will be executing that mapping. So to execute a mapping in Informatica using the Workflow Manager, you will create a session for that mapping, which you have developed in your designer tool. When you create the session and save it through this Workflow Manager, it will go to the repository server and stores it in the repository, the system tables. After you create those sessions, you cannot directly execute a session. So we will create a workflow for that session in the Workflow Manager, and that will also be, when you save it, that Workflow Manager workflow will be stored in the repository. Then we will execute that workflow which we have created for that particular session. Session will contain that mapping. When we execute that workflow, where from we'll execute it? We'll execute it from Workflow Manager. All this will be stored in the repository. Now when you say execute, then Informatica server fix that program from this repository. In that program, you might have written the extract data, transform data, or load data, whatever program you have written. Then Informatica server, from this repository server, goes to the repository internal programming done by the Informatica tool, picks up that program, goes to that source from where you want to extract the data. Then it will extract the data from that source, gets the data into your Informatica server, then it will load the data into your target. So actual data processing will be done by the Informatica server. So extraction will be data for data processing. Extraction will be done by the Informatica server based on your mapping program, gets the data, and in the Informatica server it will transform the data, transformation, then loads the data into your target. So actual ETL process of data will be done by the Informatica server based on what? Based on the mapping, that is the programming we have created using the designer tool, which will be stored in the repository, and the workflow manager will create a session for that mapping that will be stored in the Informatica repository. Then the session, to execute the session, we will create a workflow that also in the workflow manager and store it in the repository. Then you execute that workflow. When you say execute, then Informatica server picks that information from this repository, extracts the data, transforms the data, and loads the data into the target. When this process of extraction, transformation, loading is going on, you can monitor it. That monitoring will be done through the workflow monitor of the client tool. So any mapping program to be executed, first it has to be created in the designer, then in the workflow manager. For that program, which they call it as mapping, we need to create a session. To that session, then we create a workflow. All this will be stored in the repository. When you execute the workflow, then Informatica server picks that, goes to the source, extracts, transforms, and loads the data into the target. While this process is going on, if you want to monitor it, then you use the tool called Workflow Monitor to monitor the flow of the data. And one more important point, which I want to bring it here. Monitor the execution. While the execution is going on, Informatica server will create a session log file. Informatica server will create a session log file. In this session log, everything will be written, even if the execution is successful or failure or anything happened. What is happened during this process of extraction, transformation, and loading, it will be written in that session log file. And you can access that session log file using the workflow monitor, or you can access from the operating system where the Informatica server is installed. Your key for a ETL developer is session log file in any mapping. Actual process, what happened, and everything will be stored in that session log file. This is the overall view of Informatica architecture, which again I will cover it in bit detail in the chapter 3. But in Chapter 1, we should understand this. So, I'll come again on this. Informatica architecture of 7.1 version contains two server components, repository server and Informatica server, and client components called designer, workflow manager, workflow monitor, and repository manager. Regarding this Power Plug and modeling tools, we will cover later. So whenever you install Informatica servers, it needs a relational database where it will store its system tables. It is called as a repository. So while installing these servers, this repository can be on a relational database like Oracle, DB2 or Informatica or Sybase, any relational database where it will store its system tables. That is what we call it as a repository. There are two roles in Informatica, Informatica Administrator and Informatica Developer. This program is for Informatica Developer role or Informatica Consultant. The other role is Informatica Administrator. The role of Informatica Administrator is to install Informatica servers, install the databases, and also manage the servers, maintenance of servers, applying patches, taking backups. That is the role of administrator. Plus, he will create users for accessing Informatica. So, in the organizations, administrator will play a bigger role of managing it. So, the role of an Informatica developer will be using the designer tool, workflow manager and workflow monitor. Administrator will create the username, password and privileges for whoever is going to use the Informatica tool through the repository manager client tool, and that username, password, privileges will be stored in the repository and the communication is through the repository server. Now as a ETL developer, you will be using the designer tool. In the designer tool, you will develop the mapping, which is nothing but a GUI-based program of your ETL. After you develop, when you save it, that program will be saved through the repository server into the repository. If there are any errors, it will show you the syntax errors. Then to execute that mapping, in the workflow manager, you have to create a session. And to that session, to execute that session, you have to create a workflow. Session and workflow will be created in the workflow manager, saved through the repository server into the repository, and to execute that workflow. Basically, workflow is pertaining to that session. Session is pertaining to that mapping which we have created in the designer. Then the workflow, when you say execute, then Informatica server internally will go to the repository, gets that program, goes to the source, extracts the complete data, puts it in the server where you have installed that Informatica server software. It will transform the data and load the data into the target as per your program of GUI based, that is mapping. Then while loading the data, you want to monitor it, then you will use the client tool called workflow monitor. And also while doing the ETL process, Informatica server will create a file called a session log file. In that, everything will be written, success or failure, all the information will be written in that log file. For all ETL developers, whenever you want to see any failures, reason for failure, all this will be, you have to access the session log file. This is the overall architecture of Informatica 7.1. Then, as I discussed before, repository manager client tool is used for administration purpose. Can manage multiple repositories. Designer helps you to create the source, definition, target, definition and transformation to build that mapping. Mapping is a program that will be built using the designer tool. In the workflow manager, you define set of instructions called workflow to execute that mapping which you build in the designer. In the workflow monitor, you can monitor it using the Gantt chart. You can view it as a Gantt chart or task view using the workflow monitor. All the tools of that Informatica client tools look and feel will be the same. A repository manager, you will have the navigator window, analysis window, output window, and dependency window. This tool is used by the administrator, not by the ETL developer. So you will not have privileges in the project for repository manager for a ETL developer role. Then your bread and butter is the designer tool where you develop that ETL program. The look and feel is you will have the navigator window, workspace, and the output window. And in the workflow manager, you will have the navigator window, workspace, and the output window. In the workflow monitor, you can monitor the work which you have done, the task view, or the Gantt chart of Informatica using the workflow monitor. This is the overall view of the Informatica architecture and the client products. And the session log file looks like this. How to access it, how to set up a mapping, how to create a session, how to create a workflow, how to execute it. It is very easy in Informatica. We should have clarity what exactly this tool is, what it will do, and all that should be your clarity. First, let's have clarity of what Informatica does. How to do it, we will cover in this training program. You can do it. It is very easy. But we want you to focus on what exactly happens in Informatica as a tool. Now, I'll give you a demo of Informatica client tools. Go to Start button, Programs, Informatica Power Center 7.1.1. Then go to Informatica Power Center 7.1.1 client. You will have Designer, Repository Manager, Workflow Manager, Workflow Monitor. First, I will show you the Repository Manager. You double click and enter the password, connect. So this is the navigator window, analysis window, dependency window, and the output window. This is your work repository manager. Then to access client tool designer, programs, Informatica Power Center 7.1.1, client, designer. How to access this? All this I will tell you in few minutes. Then you have connect using the username password. Then this is your navigator window. Then this is your workspace, and you will have the output window here. This is your designer. Then programs, Informatica Power Center 7.1.1, 7.1.1 client. Go to Workflow Manager. You double click on this, connect. Then you have the navigator window, workspace, output window. Then you start a workflow, it will open up this workflow monitor. We will do everything one after the another. We will do as part of our training program. Just I am giving you the demonstration of this. Then right click and say get session log file, and this is your log file which I was talking about. It will tell you how many records were extracted, how much were loaded, at what time it started, at what time it has ended. So it will give you all the information of success, failure, and all that stuff. This is about the demonstration of your now we are going to discuss about the access, how we are going to access the Informatica, and also as part of this training program we are going to do some lab exercises. For that we have already sent you the ETL specification document, and we have already asked you to take the printout of the ETL specification document. And this is the ETL specification document which we have sent you. And how we will flow is we will be telling you which information to be entered into the ETL specification document, which makes easy for you when you do the lab, that is the practicals. For everybody we have provided an ID to access Informatica, that is, we call it as a student ID. A sample of that student ID is Stanza01B9. Or for different people on this training program, will be giving a separate ID. Stanza01B9, Stanza02B9. Like this, we will be providing you the IDs. So, in your ETL specification document in page 2, under your ID, student ID, you please enter the ID which we have provided you. Example, Stanza01B9. Whatever ID we provide you, you please enter in this document. Now, as we discussed, you will be working on designer or workflow manager or workflow monitor. As per the architecture which we have discussed, whatever work you do, it will be stored finally in this repository. So you need a repository name which is already installed by the administrator and kept ready. So you need to add a repository in your client tool. Example, I am going to the designer tool. Now, how to add the repository? Go to repository and say add, give a name here. For example, I give student exam_example, but you have to enter only student, which I will tell you what to write in the detailed specification document, and you enter the username and you say OK. Once again I tell you, you need to add the repository first time. From the designer tool, you say add, give a name, that is, in your case it is student, and username administrator. For me, for you it is your ID which we have provided you, that is Stanza01B9 or whatever ID we have provided. So add the repository name as student and username as your ID. Please write it down in your ETL specification document. Under to add repository, you enter here student, small letters, and enter the ID, small letters, whichever we have provided you. That will be your username. Now after you enter your username in the designer tool, then you double click on student. For student example, I just gave you as an example. Actual repository is student and the password. I'll provide you the password in next few minutes, and hit on more. Here you specify the host name and the port number. Means, what is this host name? It is nothing but your repository server name, or repository server on which machine it has been installed, that machine name. Because your communication from the client tools is through the repository server to that repository, so you have added the repository name on which you are going to work. And how will you communicate? The designer tool, it will communicate for that repository through the repository server. So you need to provide host name or the IP address of the machine on which the repository server has been installed. Then the port number. For some it is 5001 or 5002. We will provide you while you are doing the lab. So, and you say connect. Now we are going to connect to the designer tool. So, in the ETL specification document, you enter, that is I am talking about to connect to the repository, you enter your ID, that is example Sanza01 batch 9, password is the same, Sanza01 batch 9, host name, in your example Sanza-global, all are in small letters, port number 5001, and these are the information you need to enter to folder name is automatically given to you based on your name. We already created the folder name for you. I'll tell you the importance of folder name in next few minutes. So when you enter that username, password and privileges and the host name and the port number, you will be able to access it. When you access, you will see a folder under your name. This is how you access your Informatica client tool. One tool, if you access it, others it will automatically will have that information, but you have to enter the username and password. This is how you access the designer. Now the importance of the folder is in Informatica every project or wherever you work in Informatica tool, you will work under the repository. This is your repository. Connecting to that repository is to the repository server, where you will provide the machine name on which that server was installed, then the port number on which that server, repository server is installed, plus you will be working on folders. Like in Windows, you will have folders. Here also in Informatica, you will have folders. In projects, for every project, they will create a folder. Here we created a folder for every user, every student we created a folder, but in projects, every project will have one folder. So, this folder will be created by the administrator using the repository manager. He will be creating it. He or she will be creating it. You won't be creating it. Developers will not create it. Administrator will create it. So, I'll show you how they create it. Folder, create. For you, I will be giving the name as Sansa, folder name, batch 9 or batch 10, whatever. So, but I'll create only the Sansa folder here, and these are the user groups and their privileges. And you say, okay, administrator will create this folder, and he can also will create the user privileges, group privileges. All this will be created by the administrator using the repository manager tool, which you won't be doing it because you are Informatica developers. Now, I'll close this repository manager. So, for you, your folder will be your name, which will be already created by the administrator. So, in Informatica, to access it, here first time you add a repository, enter the username, then you double click on that repository to connect it, then you enter the username, password, and you click on a more button, then you will get the host name, you enter it, and the port number, then you say connect, then the folder, with that folder you will be able to see it in your designer tool. Let me go back to the designer. The folder has been created, but it will not show up here because it will not get refreshed. So I'll connect again. Then this folder has been created. That is your Sansa folder has been created. When you go into the projects, or when you get a job and working on projects, you should ask the ETL developer you should ask the ETL lead or Informatica administrator to provide you with the repository name on which you are going to work, username, password, host name, port number, and the folder name. This information you have to ask your Informatica administrator of the repository name, username, password, host name, port number, folder name, which Sansa has given in this specification document also, what you should ask the ETL lead or the Informatica administrator. So this is the way you access your Informatica. The next, I want to discuss about the lab setup or the practicals you are going to do in Informatica. We have created a mini case study. We have created 3 databases. We call it as source, staging, and target. That is a final destination. We try, wherever required, we try to incorporate the data warehouse concepts, strategy, or a data warehouse in a project, how they do it as far as possible. So you will extract the data from this source, transform and load it into staging, and from staging again you extract, transform and load it into your dimension tables and fact tables. For some mappings, we have extracted from source and directly loaded into target because the concepts were not able to be covered in this mini case study. So we created separately for some of the concepts. We are going to extract data from table and some of the flat files. Promotions, employees, west, east. These are the files. Please understand this. There is the source, staging, and the target database. These are all 3 databases which are created for you by our administrator. So we'll be using these tables and we'll be going to create mappings. So the lab details, you please go to the sheet number 3. in your detail specification document, then enter this information of database 1 dv underscore src, that is the name of that database, host string is src. Please write it down in your ETL specification document, page number 3. dv underscore stg, host string is stg, dv underscore tgt, that is the name of the database. This is the connect string which you need in your Oracle. Then how to access the username, password and the host string. For database 1, it is name is dv underscore src, username is src underscore informatica, password is read only, host string is src. For database 2, dv underscore stg, username stg underscore, your hex. Here hex means your ID. When I say your ID means that the Sansa ID which we have provided, stg underscore Sansa example 01 batch 9. Password is the same, stg Sansa, all are small letters please, B9. Connect string stg. For third database is dv underscore tgt, username tgt underscore your ID, password tgt underscore your ID, host string is tgt. So please enter this data in your sheet. If you don't enter it, you will forget many things. So I request all of you to enter the information in your sheets. All are small letters. So please enter it in your sheets. If not, you will forget it. So this is the databases which you are going to work on, and to access those databases, these are the usernames and passwords and connect strings. I hope you have written this.